The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning if you're watching the recording, or evening, and welcome to this Sybiz 20 release webinar. And could you believe it's December 2019 already? That's very hard to believe. So we'll probably take up around 30 to 45 minutes of your time today, and we'll whiz through the slides and cover a whole bunch of stuff and leave you to the rest of your days. So basically, we're just going to be having a quick look at our new corporate logo and then covering, obviously, what's in Sybiz Vision 20 and Visipay 20, and also talking a little bit about some of the changes coming up in single touch payroll. I know we've only just got used to it, but there's some quite fundamental changes on the horizon that just give you early heads up about that, and obviously we'll repeat that over the next year or so in the lead up to the changes coming into play. Okay, so just the new corporate logo has been, we won't spend too much time on this, of course, but it's been about 15 years since we last changed our corporate logo. So our marketing people have come up with this brand new, fresh looking logo for us. And it's just important, I guess, to give you guys a heads up that the logo has changed in this day and age where there's a lot of impersonation of brands going on. If you start seeing this new logo coming out in emails, etc., you might not think it's from us, given that it has been quite a lengthy time on the old logo. So keep an eye out for that. And just I guess a little bit of a walk down memory lane here. Over the last 45 years there has been a number of corporate logo changes, and so this is just the last in a long line of those logos. And I guess going into our 45th year next year, and obviously ending this decade, it was a good time to refresh the brand and so on and so forth. Okay, into Sybiz Vision, and I should just mention that we're just a few of the concepts that we're going to be going through, much easier to explain with screen captures rather than darting in and out of different screens in the software. So that's why it's not a live demonstration as such, but so that's the way we'll be conducting this presentation today. So the main new features in Sybiz Vision 20, we're giving you a lot more posting flexibility with regard to your stock as to the movements of your stock through the order delivery invoice process, and that also goes through to the service and job ledgers as far as the interaction of stock is concerned with those. So we'll explain all of these things in a little more detail as we go through the slides. You'll now, through the opportunities in the CRM module, you will be able to generate sales quotes, job estimates and service quotes, which will auto-link to those opportunities, so you get that sort of 360 view of those transactions at that level. And we also have the ability now to invoice purchase deliveries. So up until now, you could either do obviously a standalone invoice or base an invoice on an order. But just because of the underlying complexity, especially when it comes to multiple deliveries associated with one particular invoice, it does get a little complex under the hood, and so we've worked through that complexity, and you now have the ability to invoice one or many purchase deliveries. And another thing that we're bringing you on the inventory side of the fence is some workflows to support what some people call cut length, and the terminology in the software we're using is source from. So that's where you have, say, you buy a roll of cable, but you sell it in cut lengths, and you want to maintain that association of the original source of that product through to the end product that you're actually selling in those cut lengths. And it's not just length, that can be various other aspects of measurement as well. So we'll talk about all of these things in a bit more detail. So the posting accounts on the inventory side, and I should just mention that when we put substantial changes like this into the software, we set about to make sure that it's not going to upset the apple cart for anyone who doesn't really care too much about these changes. So if they don't want more fine-grained posting through to the general ledger with respect to their inventory transactions, they can just continue as they were and not have to worry about coming into these screens and setting up these additional accounts. So just stepping through, you've got your I guess the accounts that have been there for some time. So you've got your accrual accounts there, and we've now also added the job accrual and service accrual, which will help sort of just manage that flow of stock through the delivery and ultimate process through to the invoice, just to give you, I guess, a better timing of your cost of sales at the general ledger level. Similarly, if you wanted to go for a more perpetual view of your general ledger from a stock posting account point of view, then you now have the ability to set up all those accounts as well. And the manufacturing accounts, they've been there for some time as options for you as well. In terms of what that means as you process transactions, so traditionally what happened with the periodic account setup is that if you purchased some inventory, you would get an entry through to your job purchases and your closing inventory accounts. And this little profit and loss extract here that doesn't have those postings after that purchase has occurred. And instead, once we sell those goods, that's when the cost of sales account gets hit. So you're getting a better reflection of the cost of sales and gross profit based on the timing of the actual transactions. So that's just a very high level indication that most people can relate to as far as those changes in the posting accounts are concerned. But there's obviously a lot more combinations and permutations, which we won't bore you with today. But I guess the takeaway is that you do have that flexibility now, not only from an inventory level, but job and service as well. And as I mentioned in the CRM module in opportunities, you now have the ability, once you get to the point where you're ready to generate a quote type transaction, so whether that's a sales quote, service quote, or job estimate, you can fire those off directly from the opportunity, and those transactions will remain linked to the opportunity, so easy to get back to and easy to come from the other side. So if you're maintaining the quote and wanted to jump straight to the opportunity, that's easy to do there as well. And the ability to invoice one or many purchase deliveries, this is like a lot of the other transactions in the software, where when you go to add a document to the next transaction in the sequence, you have the ability to add one or many. And again, as I said, up until now, it's been invoicing orders from a purchase perspective, but now you have the ability to pick up deliveries as well as, of course, still pick up orders if that's the workflow that you're used to. So that has been added as well. And the source from stuff, this is going to be a little confusing, but we'll do our best to make it as clear as possible. But as I said, this is something where you have a doesn't have to be, I'm using a cable spool here, but it could be a massive carton of something that you're taking bits out, or could be a plank of wood. All sorts of things can be used in this regard. So what the premise is that you have your source product, and then you create another product that sources its quantities from the source product, and you have a few different settings as to how you source from that product. So you can say, whenever I sell any of this, even if someone comes along and they want to buy basically every bit of this cable that I've got in stock, you can say, okay, well, I want to just sell it without cutting it, or I want to actually convert it into my new product before I sell it, irrespective of what I do from a cut perspective. So again, as I said, it's a little bit difficult to explain, but just jumping on to this scenario here, where we have a spool of cable that's 30 meters long, and someone's come along and they want to buy 50 meters of that cable. So that's obviously going to be more than just one spool. So we're going to have to do some cutting to fulfill this order. So if I say in this example that I want to source it all from my end product, because I don't have enough of my end product in stock, so my end product says I have 30 meters on hand, my source product says I have 2, but that's 2 lots of 30 meter rolls, so that's another 60 meters. So even though I have in total 90 meters in stock and I only want to sell 50 meters, because I've said that I want to source it all from the product, so this is the product here, and I don't have sufficient quantity, the product isn't going to let me sell it into negative. So that's just to give you an indication of that setting where you say all from product, or the combination here where I have sufficient quantity. If I combine the source from product with the stock that I have on hand, I have sufficient quantity, and therefore I'm able to complete that sales process at that point in time. So again, it's not going to be for everyone, but if you are in that line of business where you're selling partial lengths of cable or offcuts of wood or anything else of that nature, then this would definitely be worth a look for you. From the enhancements perspective, again, just looking at some of the screen captures, and I guess the nature of the enhancements in version 20 are more about sort of extending some of the functionality that's in other areas of the software to new areas of the software. So something like new from, and I guess one of the benefits of covering this stuff today is that you may not be aware of new from. So it's in lots of areas of the software, and it's just been added to standing journals. So if this is the first time you've seen new from, by all means take a look at it within the software. It makes it easy when you're creating new customers, products, and a whole range of other things, including transactions. So it has been extended here into the standing journals now as well. And similarly, if you're not used to the find panels in various parts of the software, the find panel has now been added into the offset screen. So if you have plenty of transactions going through on various customers and suppliers, and it's a little bit hard to match what it is they're paying off against the remittance, then you now have the find panel, which will help you get to transactions a lot quicker than it was previously in the traditional ordering where they were in their aging date order. So that just makes that offsetting process a lot easier if you have a lot of outstanding items to offset against. And similarly, this is another extension of existing functionality in the software where you could previously track the progression of an order through the sales cycle. And one of the limitations previously was you weren't able to go to the invoice to see what had occurred. You'd have to go to the order or the delivery and see what occurred. But now we've just extended that through to the invoice as well. So you've just got the ability now in the invoices area just to right click on a transaction, click on track, and that will show you the progression of those various items on that invoice through the order and delivery process there. And there's more flexibility with processed orders now as well. So orders by their nature are a little bit different to invoices and deliveries in that orders can be processed multiple times. We've added some new functionality in recently in version 19 to if you wanted to change the customer before an invoice was processed, for example, you have the ability to do that. And that's just been extended through to process sales orders now. So you may have hit the process on a sales order or a purchase order and gone, that's the wrong customer or the wrong supplier. And as long as that order hasn't been used in any deliveries or invoices downstream, you now have the ability with sales and purchase orders to come in and do things like change customers, update prices or costs on the supplier side, etc. And just do more things of that nature that you weren't able to do previously with processed orders. And there's a whole batch of other improvements as well. So we have extended the automatic payment defaults to make it easier to do the pretty much use the same settings each time that you go in there. We've also extended the automatic numbering, so that's pretty much anywhere that it could possibly make sense now, even though some people may not utilise automatic numbering for customers. It is there if they wanted to, for example, and it's been extended on to suppliers and projects as well. There's been some reporting improvements. Probably the most notable of those is that the age balance reports now reflect the foreign exchange rates as at the date that you're running the report. So that allows you to get a better reflection when you run transactions, or sorry, run these reports in prior periods. It will do some recalculations there to give you more as at reflection as to where things were at as far as foreign customers and suppliers are concerned. In the analytics, so both out of the box and custom analytics, you now have some more ability to resize the panels there, so it gives you a better usability on those analytics as you're working with them. The import and export of data has been expanded as well. So previously, bringing in project budgets was a one at a time affair, but now they can be brought in with many project budgets in the same file. So that just there's a time saver there. The contracts can be exported and imported as well, which will make it easier to create new contracts and modify existing contracts. And we did have some limitations in certain import functions within the software. The notes fields weren't available, whereas in other areas they were, so that's just been made consistent there now. From a manufacturing standpoint, just some of the notable enhancements there is that you've got now more information in the quantity and value report that reflects more what's going on at the manufacturing level in your standard inventory report. The description for any issues and returns is now in the inquiry screen, and the estimated unit price has been increased from 2 to 4 decimals just to get some better accuracy in that area of the software as well. The taxable payment annual report has been improved to handle non-standard financial years. So previously that was just locked down to the standard Australian financial year. Fixed assets has had some work done on it, most notable any asset acquisitions that are conducted through the creditor's ledger. Previously, what would happen is when you did your purchase for a fixed asset, it would update the company book, but it wouldn't actually put any information in any secondary books such as tax books, etc. that you had. So you'd have to go in and do a fixed asset journal for that. But there's the ability now to automate that process in fixed assets. And there's been some changes and additions to workflow breakpoints. And it's probably just a good point at this bullet point here just to make an announcement as to when we release version 20, because of the time of the year, we're actually not going to be having the pop-up come into the login screen to say, hey, the new version is now available. You'll get an email that'll come out and notify you that the new version's available. But we just thought, because of the time of year and some people may already be on holiday, that we don't want people just sort of willy-nilly going, okay, new version's available, let's download it and run it. There are some things that you need to be aware of. And so by all means, if you like what you see in version 20 and you want to get your hands on it as soon as possible, work with your business partners through that upgrade process. And other than that, just we will, in the new calendar year, when people are back on deck, we will have the normal pop-up occur at the login screen to let you know that it's available. But with some of the changes in the workflow breakpoints, that will potentially require some work in conjunction with the developers that you're working with or the business partners that you're working with, and they'll have some more information as to what's required there. So that's the improvements as far as Sybiz Vision is concerned. And just a couple other things to point out. We did publish earlier this year our product roadmap. If you haven't seen it, just jump onto Google and type in Sybiz roadmap, and you'll get a link to this document which explains what we're setting about doing over now the next 4 years. It was 5, but it's now 4. And in that, you may see that there's mention of the web API. Now, that's a bit of jargon, but essentially at the moment, Sybiz Vision is extensible with third-party applications and add-ons being able to be integrated within Sybiz Vision to do all sorts of amazing and wonderful things that we've seen out there in the wild. And the web API is just technical speak for giving another avenue for third-party developers and third-party products to integrate within Sybiz Vision. So, and I guess just to differentiate between what's there at the moment and the web API is, as the name implies, the web API is more at the sort of web internet level of integration. So that opens up for websites and apps, etc., to be more easily integrated into Sybiz Vision. So we did have the decision to make a week or so ago just to say, look, we're not happy to release the web API just where it's at, but there's a lot of goodness in Sybiz Vision 20, so we'll get that out the door for the customers that are champing at the bit, wanting to get their hands on those new features. But the web API should now be released in the first quarter of calendar 2020. So yeah, just wanted to be upfront about that, especially if you have seen the roadmap and are waiting for that web API to be released. A couple other little bits of homework, and again, this is another reason why we don't want to sort of publish that the update's available for version 20, so that people don't get themselves into a bind if IT staff, etc., are already on holiday. The Business Intelligence Centre, we have pushed that into its own separate installation, and the reason for that is that the installation methodology that we use for Sybiz Vision when you're doing an update is to uninstall the old version and then install the new version, and that process didn't play nicely with the Business Intelligence Centre, and that led to some issues on upgrades where Business Intelligence Centre would have some issues, and so we've de-risked that by putting BIC into a separate installer, and so that means when you get an upgrade for Sybiz Vision, that will still do the uninstall, reinstall process, but it will leave BIC in place and not subjected to any of the rigmarole of the uninstall, reinstall. So just a heads up there. So that'll be important if you are adding new workstations on, etc. Just to be aware that if you get this message pop up, that just means that the BIC needs to be installed separately. From a Visipay point of view, let's jump in and have a look at just a couple of the enhancements. There's some other minor enhancements which aren't worth the airtime, but obviously the big focus in recent years, as we've said, has been on single touch payroll, and not to sort of do too much outside of that, just to sort of de-risk the transition to single touch payroll reporting and not confuse the issue. And one of the things the ATO have said to software developers is to make it a little more difficult for customers to change employee numbers, and that's been a big issue for the ATO through the end of financial year, where if employee numbers are changed, because you're submitting year-to-date information each time you do an STP submission, that was leading to what the ATO called duplicate data, where it wouldn't necessarily recognise that someone's employee number has changed. It would just see them as a new employee, and lead to situations where the information could be duplicated when people went to do their tax returns and things like that. So the ATO did a pretty good job of tidying that up behind the scenes, but it's still something that they're not really looking forward to continue to do. So they've asked us to make it a bit harder for you to change employee numbers. So what you will see when you go into an employee record and there's been STP data submitted for that employee for that financial year, the employee number field will be greyed out, and then you'll have the ellipsis button here in the right hand side, and you interact with that, get a bit more information about the consequences of changing the employee number, and just a further reminder that a zero update event should be done before changing that employee's number. So that makes life easier behind the scenes for the ATO. And by all means, you can of course continue to change employee numbers, but just we're doing our best in conjunction with the ATO just to make you more mindful of the consequences of doing that. And there's an STP reconciliation report that's coming out as well in version 20. This is, it'll look a little bit different to this, but essentially giving you something that's very similar to the old payment summary reconciliation report. And speaking of payment summaries, they are still in the background of the software, and so a number of the other enhancements have just been around that sort of combination of payment summary reporting and STP reporting, given that some people are still issuing payment summaries just voluntarily, just to give their employees that security blanket of that bit of paper that they're used to receiving over the years. And also there's things like the payment summaries are included in the employee self-service module, and so just to sort of, I guess, marry the STP data and payment summary data through to ESS as well. That's some other improvements that have been done under the hood as far as that reporting is concerned. And just a couple of other things to do with Visipay, not necessarily version 20, but the information that we're getting from the ATO from a number of fronts is that the ATO world is tending more and more toward data privacy. We've seen some fairly serious data breaches over the years in different fields, and so the ATO is just trying to sort of keep ahead of the game, especially with things like tax file numbers and superannuation information. They want to really make it more difficult for that information to get out into the wild. So we're not there yet, but as we've seen with the way that Sybiz handles STP, you're not downloading a file to your desktop and leaving that vulnerable. You're not picking up a file and sending it via an email. There's a whole process that happens behind the scenes there, and that's what the ATO wants to see down the track. And indeed with STP, even though not everyone's doing STP that way, everyone should be doing STP that way, but there are still people doing STP by emailing files around, and that's something that the ATO is just not going to tolerate for too much longer. And similarly with the Sybiz Super side of things, or the SuperStream side of things, that's something where we're starting to move now toward a process of not exporting information. So we're phasing out the export of the super information in anticipation of it no longer being applicable. And so what that means is Sybiz Super users, the old portal is being phased out. So basically the reason for that is some of these pending changes and tightening up that the ATO wants to see the software industry do is just too hard to retrofit that to the old Sybiz Super portal, and so that's being phased out, and now the Sybiz Super is being done through the employer portal that STP is done through. So so what that means is that the export from Visipay will continue to be made available for Sybiz Super purposes, and then there'll be an eventual transition so that Sybiz Super will be very similar to what you're getting with STP in terms of it happening behind the scenes there. And from an STP point of view, we are already talking about STP2, and that's going to lead to quite substantial changes to the data in terms of what's included and also the data structure. And in hindsight, it probably would have been good to do this from the outset with STP, but the ATO, they decided it was best just to basically repurpose the payment summary reporting and shoehorn that into the STP reporting format. But now that the dust has settled on that, they are looking at getting more out of STP. And indeed, the federal budget this year committed $82 million to this extension in STP. And so just before I talk a bit more about this STP2 stuff, it's not really anything to worry about today, but we have just received note last week that ATO systems are going to be maintained from Christmas Eve until the 2nd of January. And what that means from an STP point of view is that the ATO will continue to receive that data, so you'll still be able to submit it without an issue, but it won't actually be processed by the ATO until the new year. So if you are used to getting that pretty quick confirmation from the ATO that everything's been processed and accepted and it's all good. They have had a 72-hour service level, but in most cases it's been a matter of a couple hours at most. But over this period where they're maintaining their systems, there is going to be that week and a bit where they're not going to be processing any data, so you won't see it pop up on the ATO business portal. You won't see it reach that end state finalisation in the STP or the Sybiz employer portal. And so it is vitally important, if you are the person that normally processes the payroll, but you're handing the keys to Visipay across to the boss while you take a bit of leave, and they're going to be doing the payroll that one time a year while you're away, make sure that they're aware of that as well, especially if you've left detailed notes to let them know that they're to expect a 72-hour service level from the ATO, because that definitely won't be happening over that period there. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And so just about the STP changes for STP2. Now, this isn't coming into play until 2021 from a Sybiz point of view. So it sounds like it's way off into the distance, but in reality, we're only talking 18 months. And there are going to be some things where you're going to need to set up new pay items in the system and change some of your data structures to make sure they conform with these new requirements. And so it is something where you will see progressively more and more information coming out. We'll have some releases prior to 2021 or prior to the start of the 21-22 financial year that will allow you to start getting ready for the change in reporting requirements under STP2. So essentially, it's going to give the ATO more dissection of your income and your employees' income, including things like leave. So if you pay someone annual leave, the ATO wants to know, okay, was this leave paid because this employee took leave, or was it a cash out of their annual leave? So we can follow the bouncing ball there, where there's certain rules in different jurisdictions and different leave types as to what can be done from a cash out point of view. And so this is going to give the ATO more information to keep everyone honest as far as those kind of things are concerned. And there's also, this is, I guess, the big benefit of STP2 is that it will replace other reporting, including the tax file number declaration and the employment separation certificates. And the big thing with the Department of Human Services is the child support reporting. So between all three of those, it means there's going to be hundreds of thousands of less reports filed each year by employers with only a little bit of a change in terms of what's actually recorded and reported in payroll software. So it should be a good evolution to STP2. The data restructuring that's happening will make it easier to evolve STP further down the track if different types of income come into play, like we saw recently with working holiday makers. If there's something like that comes in, we won't need to issue a new version of STP to cater to that. So yeah, obviously a lot changing there. We don't have to worry about it too much, but in terms of just now, but again, just giving you a heads up as to what's coming there. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time. We won't actually take any live questions today. If you have sent some questions through the chat box, we will deal with those. But what you'll see is more information will come out once the software is released, and so it's probably going to answer the questions that you got on the tip of your tongue anyway. So just if you wait until that information comes out, and by all means, you can ask us or your business partners for some more information in regards to those changes in Sybiz Vision 20. So with that, all the best for a safe and enjoyable festive season, and all the best for 2021, and we'll catch you in the new year. Thank you again.